Okay, so in addition to erosion and desertification and all of that, and talking about how cropland affects soil quality, it's also true that grazing practices, so growing livestock, also affects soil quality. So more than 3.4 million billion goats, cattle, and sheep are raised in rangeland around the world. So there's half as many of those as humans. And if the livestock populations don't exceed the carrying capacity, meaning that they are not eating more, they're not grazing more than the land can renew. If it's not sustainable, or if it is sustainable, rangelands can still be functional ecosystems. There's tons of functional rangeland ecosystems, but the problem is that if there's too many animals and the grass can't replenish itself with enough time without adequate regeneration of plant biomass, the result is overgrazing. So land is overgrazed when there are more animals eating off of it than the carrying capacity can support. And so overgrazing exposes soil and makes it vulnerable to erosion. So basically, it's a very big positive feedback loop. So as the animals are walking around and they are from their hooves, they're removing the plant matter and leaving the soil open to erosion. And then that makes the plants more difficult to grow back. So basically, we have a little feedback loop here. So overgrazing removes native grass because it's being eaten and kicked up. That exposes the bare topsoil, which leaves it vulnerable to water and wind erosion, which then can remove more native grass. So there's one positive feedback loop. It can also compact the soil and damage the structure. So as the plants are removed, then the animals are walking around on the bare soil, and so it compacts the soil down and damages those natural horizons that are there. And so this decreases the water infiltration. It's harder for water to get into the soil, which makes it more difficult for plants to grow. It decreases the aeration, meaning that there's less pores in the soil for air to be in. So there's also less place for gas exchange for plants to get oxygen and carbon dioxide in and oxygen and carbon dioxide out. And then invasive species can also gain foothold and outcompete natives in their altered environment. So the native plants or animals would be more likely to succeed, but as their environment, their soil gets altered, it's harder for them to. So as those things happen, it decreases the grass growth and survival, which removes the native grass. And so it's just a big perpetual positive feedback loop. So soil degradation actually grazing actually causes as much soil degradation as croplands, and it can cause more desertification. So overgrazing is a very big problem for our soil and our agriculture. But humans and governments are doing something about it. So policy can promote conservation measures in agriculture. So many nations spend billions in subsidies to promote unsustainable practices, such as growing water-thirsty crops in desert regions. So basically what this means is that a lot of farmers are subsidized by the government, meaning that they are provided with money to grow crops. So in the US, 1/5 of an average farmer's income comes from the government. And so the reason for this is that subsidies help to stabilize and secure the income of farmers, because farming is a very can be a very unstable form of form of money making, because you can have very bad seasons from one storm or from a disease breaks through, and you might have nothing to sell that year. And so that way, by the government subsidizing them, then it promotes farmers to actually be farmers and not to leave because they can't make any money. But what happens is that then it leads farmers to grow on lands that they normally wouldn't grow on, maybe lands that are not suitable for farming. So then we're leading to more land degradation. And what happens is it increases food production, and so then it lowers prices for other farmers. So if, let's say, you're growing corn and you normally wouldn't be able to grow very much corn because your land isn't very good, but you do it anyways because you're being paid to do it. Now there's an excess of corn, and so that brings down the price. It's supply and demand for any of you in economics, brings down the price of corn, and then suddenly the other farmers who aren't being subsidized, they lose money. In addition, now you're growing in a place you normally wouldn't, and you're causing land degradation there. So it's not a very good practice. But every 5 to 6 years, the US Congress passes a legislation called the Farm Bill that guides the agricultural policy for the next 5 to 6 years. Excuse me, don't mind the bell. So, the calculator.
Do you need it still?
No,
You sure?
I put the batteries in mine.
Okay, good.
It works. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Sorry, I forgot to bring it back.
Anytime. You know where they are.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Sorry. So, for example, in 2014, the Farm Bill funded 15 programs that encourage the conservation of soil, grasslands, wetlands, wildlife habitats, and other natural resources and agricultural lands. So it is every 5 to 6 years doing an assessment of the agriculture and seeing what needs to happen. So in 1985, the Farm Bill established the Conservation Reserve Program, which pays farmers to convert damaged cropland to conservation reserves. So if your cropland is damaged and you can't grow there, you might as well be paid by the government to turn it into a conservation land. Then there's also this thing called the U.S. Farm Service, and it's an agency that uses an environmental benefits index to choose which farmers would be awarded contracts in order to do this. And so there's 3 measurements that they use. One is, what will the benefits provided to wildlife be? What will be the improvement in air and water quality? And what will be the potential reduction to erosion? And if you meet the measures on that index, then you may be awarded money through the Conservation Reserve Program to convert your damaged cropland into conservation land. And while we're doing that here in the US, the United Nations also promotes conservation through the Food and Agriculture Organization to achieve many of the same goals. So it is happening across the planet. So the main takeaway here is that we need to be doing something to be more sustainable in our agricultural practices.